Language is spontaneous and unpredictable, yet education systems are tasked with a difficult engineering problem, measuring this dynamic human behavior using rigid, standardized tools. The scale of this challenge is visible in classrooms across Vietnam, where a single teacher is responsible for up to 50 students. At this density, organizing group work or conducting individualized conversational assessments becomes logistically difficult. Teachers cannot measure the unscripted speaking abilities of 50 students one by one. To see how systems adapt to these constraints, researchers analyzed 10 formal grade 6 English test papers from 5 schools across the Mekong Delta. When high student numbers limit a teacher's ability to observe individual progress, these formal tests become the primary data point used to judge educational progress and evaluate the quality of the school system. The Vietnamese Ministry of Education and Training regulates a specific testing hierarchy. Throughout a semester, students face a variety of assessments, from oral checks to comprehensive end-of-term exams. The math shows which tests carry the most influence. Notice the multiplier. 45-minute tests are weighted twice as heavily as oral and 15-minute quizzes. Therefore, the 45-minute and end-of-term exams determine the final subject average, making them the most consequential hurdles. This raises a question. Do these high-stakes exams actually measure a student's ability to communicate, or do they only assess their knowledge of isolated language rules? If these specific exams prioritize the wrong skills, the final grade provides a misleading picture of a student's actual ability to use the language in the real world. A breakdown of the 10 Mekong Delta exams reveals exactly how these assessments function. The majority of the scoring relies on sections labeled language focus. Rather than asking students to express an original idea, these sections require them to identify structures. They focus on grammar and vocabulary through highly predictable multiple-choice questions. The reading sections are also limited. They utilize text shorter than 80 words, followed almost exclusively by true-false evaluation tasks. True-false questions introduce a statistical flaw into the assessment. They offer a 50% probability of guessing the correct answer, allowing a student to pass without necessarily understanding the text. What is missing from the papers is as important as what is present. Across the analyzed exams, core communication skills like speaking, listening, and pronunciation are not assessed. These test structures prioritize technical memorization over the creative application required for actual communication. Canal's 1983 model defines language ability through 4 components. First is grammatical competence, knowledge of vocabulary and sentence rules. This is distinctly separate from the other 3, matching social contexts, organizing discourse, and using compensatory strategies. For a test to be valid, researchers argue it must measure how learners combine these 4 components simultaneously, reflecting how language is used in actual conversation. When we map the grade 6 Mekong Delta tests onto this model, we see a bottleneck. The data from the tests only engages the grammatical gear, leaving the other 3 components completely frozen. By exclusively isolating grammatical rules, the standard exam acts as a filter that screens out the messy, integrated skills required for real-world interaction. Brown's 2005 framework outlines 5 characteristics for communicative assessment. The exams met baseline parameters using age-appropriate themes. However, they failed structural execution, lacking unpredictable input, preventing creative output, and isolating skills rather than integrating them. Because multiple-choice formats provide predictable input, students never have to generate a spontaneous response. They are limited to selecting from fixed options. This reveals the divide between discrete point testing, which checks isolated variables in a vacuum, and integrative testing, which measures how those variables are actively combined. Standardized tests will very often function like a mechanical sorting machine, isolating variables strictly for the sake of easy grading. Without unpredictable inputs or the combination of multiple skills, a test measures knowledge of language facts rather than communicative competence. The impact of these tests reaches far beyond the exam room. Researchers note a 3-decade gap between the goal of teaching communication and the reality of how schools measure it. This creates the washback effect, a process where the structure of the exam begins to dictate the methods used in the classroom. Because these tests act as primary hurdles for future education and employment, teachers optimize lessons to match the test format. Teachers are often forced to move away from modern communicative training to drill students on the isolated grammar facts required to pass the written exams. This creates a situation where educational policies demand real-world communication skills, but the chosen measurement tools actively discourage teachers from focusing on them. Closing this validity gap requires a shift in how these assessments are built. Developers need to move away from testing isolated grammar rules and adopt performance-based testing that reflects real-world communication. This involves designing integrative tasks that require students to use multiple skills at once, such as listening to a prompt and then speaking in response. Future assessments must include unpredictable language input to see if students can generate creative, unscripted responses. This reflects how information actually moves and combines in the real world when it isn't restricted by a multiple-choice grid. Until we update our assessments to measure integrated performance, our educational systems will continue to measure the appearance of competence, leaving students unprepared for the reality of communication.